You ever notice how your grandma could cook the same dish you've tried a dozen times? And hers still tasted better? Same ingredients, same recipe. But somewhere between her kitchen and ours, a few small steps got left out. Not on purpose, they just weren't written down. Most of what made Grandma's food so good never showed up in cookbooks. It wasn't measurements, it wasn't secret ingredients. It was habits, timing, little rules she followed without ever explaining them. Today, I'm sharing 26 quiet kitchen tricks Grandma used every day. The kind she learned watching her own mama. The kind you only notice years later when the food doesn't taste quite the same anymore. And I'll bet as we go, you'll recognize a few you forgot you even knew. She never rushed the first step. Grandma didn't start cooking the moment she walked into the kitchen. That's something you notice only after she's gone. She'd set her purse down, hang it on the same chair every time, maybe wash her hands, maybe not yet. And only then would she reach for the pan. She let it sit on the burner longer than most of us would now. Not because she forgot about it, but because she was waiting for something, a certain heat, a certain readiness she felt more than measured. When the grease went in, it loosened right away. No sticking, no rushing, no panic scraping later. The food hit the pan already set up for success. That first quiet minute meant the onions softened instead of fighting back. Meat browned instead of stewing. And the whole dish moved forward calmly instead of being rescued step by step. She didn't call it technique. She just knew that how you begin matters. And once you start paying attention to that, you notice something else she always did before adding the next ingredient. Slipping a spoonful of mayonnaise into scrambled eggs. In mid-century kitchens, the mayonnaise jar stayed on the counter far longer than the health magazines would approve. Grandma knew that one spoonful stirred into scrambled eggs turned an ordinary breakfast into something soft and velvety, even if the skillet was older than her marriage. The trick wasn't about flavor as much as texture. The oil and egg yolk in the mayo created a custard-like consistency that felt strangely luxurious. Kids never questioned why Grandma's scrambled eggs tasted richer than the ones at the diner. She'd whisk them in a Pyrex bowl, the same one with a crack running down the side that she refused to throw away. The mayo blended right in, disappearing like a magic act. It stretched the eggs a little further too, which mattered in a decade when grocery money had to be watched closely. The smell that hit the kitchen as the mixture hit the warm skillet became part of the morning routine. Housewives back then didn't call it a trick. It was simply how you make eggs taste right. And once you knew it, you never forgot it. That silky texture was a small luxury tucked inside everyday life. Dusting cake pans with powdered sugar instead of flour. Before nonstick bakeware and silicone mats showed up in every home, women relied on tricks they learned from their mothers to prevent cakes from sticking. One of the smartest was dusting the pan with powdered sugar instead of flour after greasing it. Flour worked fine, but powdered sugar created a thin, sweet crust that kissed the edges of a cake with just enough caramelization to make guests whisper, "What's your secret?" The kitchen smelled different too. That first waft of warm sugar floating up from the oven let the whole family know something special was on the way. It made even boxed cakes feel homemade, which was half the goal. Visitors would see a perfect ring of golden-edged cake on a Corelle plate and assume hours of work went into it. Grandma just smiled and accepted the praise. Nobody talked about shortcuts unless it was with a sister or a neighbor over coffee. Powdered sugar gave a cake personality, and in busy homes where dessert needed to look impressive fast, it was a tiny bit of genius that hid in plain sight. The old grease can. Let's start with the little tin can that sat by the stove, the grease can. Every time Grandma fried bacon or sausage, she'd pour that liquid gold through a little strainer right into the can, and it just lived there, no lid, no label. Then, when she made green beans, a pot of peas, or even cornbread, she didn't reach for olive oil. She dipped a spoon into that bacon grease. That's why her canned green beans didn't taste like yours. They simmered with fatback, onion, and that smoky grease until the whole kitchen smelled like Sunday supper. These days, a lot of us toss the drippings, or we only cook with spray, and we wonder why it tastes flat. You don't have to go as heavy as Grandma did, but even a teaspoon of saved bacon grease in a pot of beans will pull you right back to her table. Smooth little handoff here, because that grease can had a best friend that never left her stovetop. Cast iron that never saw soap. Right beside that grease can sat the cast iron skillet, the one pan that did it all. She fried chicken in it, baked cornbread in it, and maybe even flipped a pineapple upside-down cake in that same black skillet. She didn't scrub it shiny with soap. She wiped it out, maybe used a little salt as a scrub, then rubbed it with grease and slid it back in the oven. Over years, that pan soaked up flavors, little bits of ham, onions, cornbread crumbs, so every new dish tasted just a touch richer than the last. That's something you can't fake with a brand new nonstick pan straight out of a box. If you've still got your grandma's skillet, tell me what she cooked in it the most. Was it cornbread, fried chicken, or something else? Now that skillet didn't just add flavor by itself. Grandma had another trick. She wasn't in a hurry. Cooking low and slow. Think about her pots of beans or that big pan of chicken and dumplings. They didn't come together in 25 minutes before soccer practice. She put them on after breakfast, let them barely bubble all afternoon, and gave them time to thicken and deepen in flavor. Those long, slow cooks let tough cuts turn tender and let the onions, garlic, and ham bones share everything they had with the broth. A pot roast in the 60s or 70s might spend half the day in a low oven, with potatoes soaking up every drop of gravy. These days, we love pressure cookers and quick fixes, and they're handy, but they don't always build that same layered flavor. So when you can, drop your heat a notch, give it another hour, and let time do the work Grandma used to do. Of course, time wasn't the only thing she trusted. She trusted her hands more than her measuring spoons. Tell me this in the comments. What's one meal you remember? Something your grandma made that you ended up loving and still think about after all this time? Seasoning by hand, not spoon. Watch an old Southern cook, and you'll notice something. The salt shaker barely touches the table during cooking. She held salt and pepper over the pot and poured until it looked right, or went in with 3 fingers for paprika and cayenne. Those spices probably lived right by the stove, a little faded from heat and age, but familiar. She'd shake some in, stir, taste, then adjust, not measuring to the 1/4 teaspoon, just chasing the flavor in her mind. That meant every pot of beans or gravy was tuned to that day. Maybe the ham was saltier or the tomatoes were more sour, so she fixed it on the fly. That's one reason your copy of her recipe card never tastes quite the same. The card can't tell you when to taste and adjust. Speaking of seasonings, that leads us right into the next trick. Dropping a sugar cube into coffee to calm bitterness. Long before flavored creamers lined supermarket shelves, Grandma kept a tiny box of sugar cubes near the stove. Not just because they looked pretty, but because one cube dropped into a pot of percolated coffee softened the bitterness in a way loose sugar never quite managed. The cube melted slowly, distributing sweetness evenly from the top to the bottom of the pot. Guests often commented that her coffee tasted smoother than what they made at home. Grandma pretended it was the brand of coffee, but the real secret sat quietly in that little cardboard box. Sugar cubes were inexpensive, tidy, and felt just a little fancy, which mattered when company came after church. The gentle sweetness brought out the rich aroma of the brew without making it taste sugary. It also made older percolators, the kind that had started to give a metallic edge, taste better. Grandma trusted the trick because it worked every time. A single cube made a pot feel like it came from a nicer household than the budget actually allowed. Adding a pinch of salt to sweet dishes. Every mid-century home cook learned early that salt wasn't just for savory foods. A tiny pinch stirred into cakes, puddings, hot cocoa, or cookie dough sharpened every flavor. It wasn't enough to taste salty. It simply made chocolate taste deeper, vanilla taste stronger, and caramel taste rounder. Housewives discovered it by watching their mothers toss a dash into pie fillings without measuring, as if seasoning the air. Grocery store cookbooks never mentioned it, yet it appeared in nearly every dessert made by hand. The trick made inexpensive ingredients taste richer, which mattered when budgets were tight. Even store-brand chocolate chips perked up with just a few grains of salt. Kids didn't know why Grandma's chocolate pudding tasted better than the instant one in the commercial. She stirred it in with the quiet confidence of someone who had done it 1,000 times. It was a small detail that changed everything. The kind of knowledge passed from one generation to the next with no need for explanation. A pinch of salt brought balance, and balance was the heart of every good dessert. Starting with real bones. Grandma's beans, soups, and peas didn't start with a box of broth. They started with a ham hock, a leftover ham bone, or chicken backs saved in the freezer. Those bones went in first, simmering until the meat loosened and the broth turned cloudy and rich. A pot of black-eyed peas or field peas with ham hock wasn't just salty water. It had collagen, little bits of smoked meat, and that stick-to-your-ribs feel. Same thing with chicken. She made stock out of every carcass, then used it for dumplings, rice, or gravy. If you've only ever used water or boxed broth, try simmering a bone or some wings for an hour before you add anything else. That deep, old-fashioned flavor shows up fast. Now, once that broth was going, she layered in something else you saw in almost every dish: the holy trio. Heavy hand with onions and celery, sometimes peppers. Those went into the pan before almost anything else. She'd sweat them down in bacon grease or butter till they were soft and sweet, and that became the backbone of her dressing, soups, and casseroles. Think about her cornbread dressing. It wasn't just bread and broth. It had onions and celery cooked clear through, carrying all that turkey drippings and sage flavor. If your food tastes a little flat, double your onions and celery and give them more time in the pan before you add the rest. That simple step is one of her quietest tricks. Once she had all that flavor built, she didn't rush it to the table either, letting things rest. Grandma knew not everything should be served the second it stops bubbling. Meatloaf, cakes, even biscuits. She'd pull them out and tell you, "Let it sit a minute," while everybody hovered. Letting food rest lets juices redistribute in meat and gives casseroles time to firm up so the slices hold together. Even a simple pound cake tastes better when it cools off just enough for the crumb to set. If you're cutting into things while they're still sloshing around the pan, try giving them a few extra minutes, just like she did. Now, of course, nothing in that kitchen went to waste, and that was another secret to her flavor. Tossing a slice of Wonder Bread into the cookie jar to keep cookies soft. Before airtight containers and resealable bags, keeping homemade cookies soft for more than a day required a bit of kitchen creativity. Grandma figured out that slipping a slice of soft white bread into the cookie jar worked better than any fancy storage method. The bread absorbed the air's moisture and kept the cookies tender while sacrificing itself in the process. Kids always wondered why there was a random piece of bread tucked under the snickerdoodles. Mama would just say, "It keeps them fresh." And that was that. The trick was simple, reliable, and cheap, which meant it fit perfectly into the era's frugal mindset. It worked on oatmeal cookies, ginger snaps, and even brownies when they started to dry around the edges. The bread never flavored the treats. It simply acted like a little kitchen guardian that kept the batch from going stale too quickly. Grandma trusted it because it always worked. It was one of those small domestic miracles that didn't need explaining. Adding a drizzle of vinegar to pie crust for extra flakiness. Pie crust was the pride of any 1970s home cook, and achieving the perfect texture was something that separated the casual baker from the seasoned one. Those in the know added a tiny spoonful of vinegar to the cold water before mixing the dough. The acid helped keep the gluten from toughening, which made the crust break into layers instead of settling into a dense slab. Housewives didn't talk much about this trick. It was one of those guarded pieces of knowledge handed down from their mothers or found scribbled in pencil on an old index card. The dough felt smoother between their fingers, easier to roll, and more forgiving on a hot day when the kitchen window let in too much sun. When guests bragged about the pie at a church dinner, they had no idea that vinegar helped make every bite delicate. Even store-brand shortening worked better with the trick, which made it indispensable. It was kitchen chemistry without the lab coat, and Grandma used it like second nature. The company touches. There was everyday macaroni and cheese, and then there was company macaroni and cheese with extra cheese, buttered breadcrumbs, or ham stirred in. Company casseroles might get parsley, paprika, or a few pimentos on top to make them pretty. Those little touches didn't just change the look, they added crunch and flavor that made those dishes unforgettable. That's the version you probably remember at holidays and church potlucks. If you're making a family favorite, add one company touch. More cheese, buttery crumbs, or a little garnish. And see if it doesn't suddenly taste like Grandma's table again. And when it finally hit the table, it wasn't lukewarm either. Dropping a whole onion into a pot of beans. Beans were a staple in many homes, especially when money was tight or the family garden produced more than they could eat. To coax maximum flavor out of a pot of pintos or navy beans, Grandma often dropped a whole peeled onion into the simmering water. No chopping, no tears, no fuss. The onion softened slowly, releasing sweetness and aroma that spread through the entire pot. Once the beans were done, the onion was lifted out with a spoon and discarded or mashed into the beans for extra depth. This trick created a background flavor that tasted like it took much more work than it did. It also made budget beans feel like a well-planned meal rather than a fallback. Grandma loved it because it kept the texture clean while still adding flavor. It was an effortless trick that stretched a simple pot into something memorable. Rubbing a cut clove of garlic on toast before adding toppings. In the 1970s, garlic wasn't yet the pantry superstar it would later become. Most families only bought a head or two a month, usually wrapped in a little mesh bag from A&P. Grandma learned that rubbing a cut clove directly onto hot toast gave a whisper of flavor without overpowering the dish. The warmth of the bread released just enough oil from the garlic to create a subtle shine on the surface. It added depth to tuna melts, cheese toast, and even leftover roast beef sandwiches. Kids never knew why Mama's quick lunches tasted better than the ones they slapped together on their own. The trick felt almost European, a detail picked up from a magazine clipping or a neighbor who fancied herself worldly. It gave everyday ingredients a boost without adding cost. The faint scent of garlic drifting across the kitchen felt like a luxury in a decade when recipes weren't yet bold with flavor. Grandma relied on this small flourish to make simple meals memorable. It was quiet elegance in the form of a single clove. Comfort over health food. Most grandmas weren't counting carbs in 1968. They were counting how many people needed a plate and how to stretch that roast so everybody got some. So they weren't shy with salt, fat, or sugar in comfort dishes. They were cooking to please and to fill bellies, not follow a diet trend. That's part of why her food felt like a hug instead of a chore. You don't have to eat like that every day now, but making those real versions on special days is one way to bring her kitchen back into yours. But even with all those tricks, there's one thing that ties it all together. And this is the heart of why her food tasted better. Stirring and watching, not walking away. There's a reason you remember her standing at the stove with a dish towel over her shoulder. She stirred gravy constantly, scraped the brown bits from the pan, and adjusted the burner without even looking. That constant attention keeps things from scorching and builds flavor in those little brown spots you scrape back into the food. She didn't set a timer and walk off. She watched the bubbles and listened to the sizzle. Cooking like that turns into second nature over decades, and it's one big reason her dishes tasted so consistent. That practice came from cooking for a lot of people, over and over again. Big Sunday dinners. As practice. Every Sunday or holiday, she ran a little restaurant out of her kitchen. Roast, 2 or 3 sides, bread, maybe dessert. She learned exactly how long it took to get everything on the table hot at the same time. When you do that week after week for years, you learn where you can take your time and where you can't. That's not something you get from cooking one big meal a month. If you still remember those groaning Sunday tables, tell me your favorite side dish that had to be on that spread, or it just didn't feel right. Of course, even the pans themselves were part of the flavor story. Taste memory, not recipe cards. If you ever asked Grandma for her recipe, she probably said things like, "Oh, just a little of this and a handful of that." She wasn't being stingy, she honestly cooked by feel. Her taste memory told her what her cornbread dressing was supposed to taste like before Thanksgiving ever rolled around. Decades of making the same dishes over and over meant she could tell by smell if the roast needed more garlic or if the beans needed another hour. That's something you can build too, just by cooking the same favorite recipes often and paying attention instead of rushing through. Now, one reason she cooked that way is because she was working with cheaper cuts that needed some love. Cheap cuts, big flavor. Compared to now, a lot of grandmas were cooking in tighter times. They bought chicken backs, thighs, and wings, not always boneless breasts. And they made pot roast out of tougher cuts. Those cuts have more connective tissue and fat, which turn into flavor and tenderness if you cook them low and slow. That's why her stews and braises tasted so rich, even if the meat wasn't fancy. If you've switched to all lean, boneless meat, try going back to bone-in thighs or a chuck roast now and then. You'll taste the difference. Another quiet trick she used with all that meat and tomatoes, just a pinch of sweetness. Sweetness in savory dishes. Grandma didn't make dessert out of her beans, but she might have slipped a teaspoon of sugar into a pot of tomatoes or green beans. That little bit of sweetness cut the acid and bitterness, making everything taste rounder. Macaroni and tomatoes in southern kitchens often had a pinch of sugar right in the stewed tomatoes, plus butter to make it taste just right. Some folks did the same with spaghetti sauce or cabbage. If your tomato dishes always taste a little sharp, try Grandma's move and add just a tiny bit of sugar, then taste again. She didn't just think about flavor, though. She thought about the time of year, too, using what was in season. A lot of her cooking rhythm followed the garden. In summer, there were fresh tomatoes, corn, okra, and peas. In winter, more canned and frozen. But the peak flavors came straight from the yard or a farm stand. Fresh-picked peas and snaps cooked together taste different from a bag pulled from the freezer. Same with home-canned tomatoes in macaroni and tomatoes or stew. They brought in sunshine from last summer. Even if you don't have a garden, grabbing seasonal produce when it's cheapest and best is one simple way to get back closer to her flavor. And once she had those good ingredients, she didn't skimp when it came to baking. Real eggs, real milk, real butter in baking. Grandma's pound cake was called pound for a reason, often a pound of butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. Her pies and cakes weren't fat-free, they were celebrations. Even cornbread changed depending on who made it. But a lot of vintage recipes used buttermilk, eggs, and some kind of fat like lard or bacon grease. That's part of why the crumb was tender and the edges were crisp in that old cast iron skillet. Today, when recipes call for margarine or low-fat milk, swapping back in real butter and whole milk for special occasions can bring that flavor home. Now, while things baked or simmered, Grandma was never far from the stove. The secret ingredient: time and love. Here's the truth a lot of us already know in our bones. The real seasoning was time and love. She had decades of practice with the same pot of beans, the same chicken and dumplings, the same pound cake, until her hands just knew what to do. Every good memory you have wrapped around those dishes makes them taste even better when you remember them. That's nostalgia. The way your mind and taste buds link a certain gravy or cake to the people who fed you and took care of you. So when your food doesn't taste quite like hers, it's not that you're doing it wrong. It's that you're still writing your own family's flavor memories. If this stirred up some memories, you might want to save this video so you don't lose these little tricks your mama or grandma used. You can even share it with your kids or grandkids and say, "This is how my people cooked." If you're ready to see some of these tricks in action, the perfect next stop is a video full of old recipes that use them all. Head over to 25 Forgotten Southern Comfort Recipes from the 1970s. No one makes anymore, where we walk through the actual dishes that covered those Sunday tables: macaroni and tomatoes, rice and gravy, skillet casseroles, and more. Click that next video, settle in, and let's keep those kitchens from the 50s, 60s, and 70s alive.